There's something nobody tells you about the moments when you completely lose it. Those moments when your voice goes sharp, your chest tightens, and you say something you'll spend the next 3 days replaying with shame. Most people assume those moments reveal who they really are. But that's not what's happening. What's actually happening is far more interesting, far more fixable, and far more important to understand than anyone has told you. Almost every emotional reaction you've ever had that you later regretted wasn't yours to begin with. It was borrowed. Inherited. It was a pattern written into you long before you were old enough to question it. The anger that flares when someone dismisses you, that's not you being weak. That's an old wound flinching. The shutdown that happens when someone raises their voice, that's not you being cold. That's a nervous system that learned silence meant survival. The problem isn't your emotions. The problem is that you've been mistaking old programming for current truth. Here's the first thing to really sit with: your emotional reactions are almost never about what they appear to be about. When someone at work takes credit for your idea and you feel that white-hot flash of rage, what you're actually feeling isn't anger at them. You're feeling the echo of every moment in your life when you weren't seen. When someone cancels plans last minute and you spiral into anxiety, you're not really upset about the dinner. You're touching an old, unnamed fear that you don't actually matter to the people you care about. The surface emotion is the messenger. But the real message is written much deeper, in a language most people never learn to read. This is why arguing about the trigger almost never resolves anything. Two people can fight about a tone of voice for 3 hours and still never reach the real conversation. Because the real conversation is always about what the tone of voice reminded someone of. When you learn to ask not, "Why does this make me angry?" but "What does this make me feel beneath the anger?" everything changes. Anger is almost always a secondary emotion. It shows up to protect something more vulnerable: hurt, fear, shame, or grief. And once you can name what's actually being touched, the anger doesn't need to work so hard anymore. It can rest. The second insight is one that changes how you see every difficult person in your life. The people who trigger you most consistently are not your problem. They are your clearest mirror. The colleague whose condescension sets you off, they are pointing to a place in you that still needs someone else's approval to feel secure. The friend whose boundary crossing exhausts you, they are revealing exactly where you have not yet learned to protect yourself without guilt. This doesn't mean these people are blameless. It means that your reaction to them is information about your interior landscape, not just theirs. And that information is a gift, even when it's wrapped in something ugly. There's a gap that exists between the moment something happens to you and the moment you respond. Most people don't know this gap exists. Life feels like one continuous, automatic flow. Something happens, you react, that reaction causes damage, damage requires apology or cleanup, repeat. But the gap is real. It's tiny, sometimes just a breath, but it is there. And inside that gap lives something that most people spend their entire lives never accessing: the ability to choose. Not to choose whether you feel something, you don't get to vote on that. But to choose what you do with what you feel. The person who seems endlessly calm isn't feeling less than you. They're simply more practiced at finding that gap and living inside it. Learning to find the gap starts with the body. Your nervous system will always know you're triggered before your mind catches up. Your jaw tightens, your shoulders rise, your breath shallows. These are not signs that something has gone wrong. These are signals that your emotional system is activated and asking for your attention. When you learn to recognize these physical signs as early warnings rather than emergencies, you stop being ambushed by your own reactions. You start feeling the trigger coming the way a good sailor feels a change in the wind, barely enough to adjust. Here's something that sounds simple but will take real courage to practice. You do not have to respond to what you feel in the moment you feel it. This is not emotional avoidance. This is emotional respect. When you feel flooded, when the chemicals are high and the story is loud, that is the worst possible moment to speak the most important truths. Waiting, even 5 minutes, even one night, is not weakness. It is the choice to be the person you actually want to be instead of the version of you that was shaped by pain. The most damaging things ever said between human beings were said in the 30 seconds after a trigger, when the rational mind had gone offline and the survival brain had taken the wheel. The other piece that almost no one talks about is the story you tell yourself in real time about what's happening. Your mind, trying to make sense of emotional flooding, generates a narrative almost instantly. They don't respect me. They're trying to humiliate me. They never really cared. These stories feel like facts. They arrive with complete conviction. But they are guesses. Interpretations filtered through whatever emotional weather you're currently standing in. The same email, the same silence, the same tone of voice will be interpreted completely differently depending on whether you're rested and secure versus depleted and afraid. Your emotional state is not revealing the truth about the situation. It is revealing the truth about what you carry. Learning to notice the story, to catch yourself mid-narrative and ask, is this the only possible interpretation? Is one of the most quietly powerful practices a human being can develop. You don't have to choose the most optimistic story. You don't have to pretend people are better than they are. You just have to stop assuming the most painful interpretation is automatically the correct one. That assumption is costing you relationships, peace of mind, and days of your life you cannot get back. The goal of all of this is not to become someone who doesn't feel things. The goal is to become someone for whom feelings are information rather than commands. There is a version of you that can sit with anger without becoming it. That can hold someone else's frustration without absorbing it as your own. That can feel afraid without letting fear write your next sentence. That version isn't superhuman. That version is just practiced, the way a musician is practiced. Not born knowing the notes, but disciplined enough to sit with the discomfort of not knowing until it slowly, inevitably becomes knowing. You were handed emotional patterns that were never chosen for you with any wisdom or intention. They were simply what happened to be present in the environment you grew up in. But you are not obligated to carry those patterns for the rest of your life. The moment you recognize a reaction as a pattern rather than a truth, you are already standing outside it. That distance, between you and your reaction, is where all the healing lives. The work is learning to widen it. Every difficult person, every moment of emotional overwhelm, every relationship that tests the edges of your patience is handing you something. Not a punishment. An invitation to finally go back and understand what was written in you before you knew how to read. And when you start doing that work, really doing it, you stop seeing the world as a place that is constantly doing things to you. You start seeing it as a place that is constantly showing you where you have not yet fully become yourself. That shift is everything. If something in this reached you, don't keep it to yourself, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and stay close, because the conversation about who you're still becoming is one worth continuing.